The dust from the dance hall floor had settled into Clara Morgan's lungs years ago. Or at least that was how it felt when she woke each morning in the cramped room above the Silver Spur Saloon in Red Bluff, California. It was the spring of 1878, and at 24 years old, she felt ancient in a profession that chewed up young women and spat them out before they reached 30. The piano downstairs started its tinny melody just as the sun broke over the Sacramento Valley, signaling another night of forced smiles, aching feet, and the grabbing hands of miners and ranchers who saw her as nothing more than entertainment to be purchased with a few coins. Clara sat at the cracked mirror in her room, studying the face that stared back at her with hollow green eyes. She had been beautiful once, or so people told her, with auburn hair that caught the lamplight and a smile that could make men empty their pockets. Now she saw only the weariness etched around her eyes, and the tightness in her jaw from clenching her teeth through another evening of being twirled around by strangers who reeked of whiskey and sweat. She had been doing this for 6 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts, and a reputation that kept respectable work far beyond her reach. The door to her room burst open without a knock, and Madame Rousseau stood in the doorway with her usual expression of contempt mixed with calculation. The woman who ran the Silver Spur treated her dance hall girls like livestock, valuable only as long as they could still draw customers, and their spirits had not yet completely broken. "You are dancing tonight, Clara," Madame Rousseau announced in her thick accent that may or may not have been genuine French. "There is a cattle drive coming through, and I need all my girls looking fresh and eager. Fix your face. You look like you have been crying." "I have not been crying," Clara replied, her voice flat. She had learned long ago that tears accomplished nothing in this life. "Well, you look terrible anyway. Do something about it." Madame Rousseau turned on her heel and left, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the thin walls. Clara closed her eyes and took a long breath. She had been saving money for 3 years now, hiding coins in a small pouch sewn into the lining of her mattress. It was not much, perhaps enough to get her to San Francisco and survive for a month while she searched for honest work. The problem was that honest work for a woman with her history did not exist. No family would hire her as a governess. No shop would take her as a clerk. The moment anyone learned she had been a dance hall girl, doors closed faster than slamming shutters in a windstorm. That evening, Clara descended the narrow staircase to the saloon below, already hearing the raucous laughter and clinking glasses that signaled a profitable night for Madame Rousseau. The cattle drive had indeed arrived, and the Silver Spur was packed with dusty cowboys eager to spend their wages on liquor and company. Clara painted on her professional smile and stepped into the crowded room, immediately scanning for the least objectionable dance partner she could find. Her gaze landed on a man standing near the bar who looked different from the usual crowd. He was tall, probably close to 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, dusty trousers, worn boots, a faded blue shirt. But there was something in the way he held himself that suggested a quiet confidence rather than the aggressive bravado most men brought through those doors. He was watching the room with an expression that seemed almost sad, as if he found the whole scene distasteful but had nowhere else to go. Clara made her way through the crowd, dodging grabbing hands with practiced ease, until she reached the bar near where the cowboy stood. Up close, she could see his eyes were a deep brown, almost black in the dim lamplight, and his hands, wrapped around a glass of whiskey, were calloused but clean. He noticed her approach and straightened slightly, a wariness entering his expression. You look like you would rather be anywhere else, Clara said, surprising herself with her honesty. Usually she opened with practiced flirtation, but something about this man made her usual script feel wrong. He studied her for a moment before responding. I could say the same about you, miss. Clara felt something shift in her chest at the simple observation. Most men looked at her and saw only the dance hall girl, the painted smile and the costume. This stranger had looked at her and seen straight through to the exhaustion and discontent she carried like a weight around her neck. "Clara Morgan," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was more businesslike than flirtatious. "Harrison Fletcher," he replied, taking her hand briefly. His grip was firm but gentle, and he released her hand immediately rather than holding it longer than necessary like most men did. "I am the trail boss for the Carter Ranch Drive. We are heading north to sell cattle in Oregon Territory." "That is a long way from Red Bluff," Clara observed, grateful for a conversation that felt almost normal. "It is. We stopped here to resupply and give the men a chance to blow off steam before we tackle the mountains." Harrison took a sip of his whiskey, grimacing slightly. "I am not much for saloons, to be honest, but the men like to see me here at least for a little while. Shows solidarity, I suppose." Before Clara could respond, another cowboy stumbled toward them, clearly already deep in his cups. He grabbed Clara around the waist and pulled her toward the dance floor with rough enthusiasm. She went with him mechanically, her body knowing the steps even as her mind remained elsewhere, thinking about the trail boss with the sad eyes who did not seem to belong in a place like this any more than she did. The night wore on in its usual exhausting fashion. Clara danced with dozens of partners, each one blurring into the next. She saw Harrison Fletcher move to a table in the corner where he sat nursing his whiskey and playing cards with what appeared to be his ranch hands. He did not dance with any of the girls, she noticed, and several times she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. It was nearly midnight when Clara finally took a break, her feet screaming in protest. She slipped out the back door of the saloon into the cool night air, leaning against the rough wooden wall and tilting her head back to look at the stars scattered across the black sky. The music and noise from inside were muffled out here, and for a few precious minutes she could pretend she was anywhere else, anyone else. "Escaping?" a male voice asked from the shadows, making her jump. Harrison Fletcher stepped into the pale moonlight, his hands in his pockets. "I did not mean to startle you. I needed some air myself." "It gets suffocating in there," Clara admitted, too tired to maintain her professional facade. "All those bodies, all that noise. Sometimes I think I will go mad if I have to dance to that same piano melody one more time." Harrison moved to lean against the wall beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "How long have you been working here?" "6 years, Clara said, the words tasting bitter. "Since I was 18. My father died and left debts I could not pay. This was the only work I could find that paid enough to keep me alive." "That is a long time to do something that makes you miserable," Harrison observed quietly. "Some of us do not have choices," Clara replied, hearing the edge in her own voice. "Not everyone gets to ride off into the sunset whenever they please." Harrison was quiet for a moment, and Clara worried she had offended him. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "My mother was a dance hall girl in Abilene back when it was really wild. She died when I was 12, worn out from a hard life and no options. I swore then I would never judge a woman for doing what she had to do to survive." Clara turned to look at him, surprised by the revelation. In the moonlight, she could see the sincerity in his expression, the shadows of old grief in his eyes. "I am sorry about your mother." "I am sorry you are stuck here," Harrison replied. "You deserve better than this." The simple statement, delivered without pity or condescension, nearly broke Clara's composure. She had not cried in years, but suddenly her eyes were burning and her throat was tight. "I have been saving money," she heard herself say, not sure why she was confiding in this stranger. "To leave, to go somewhere and start over. But everywhere I go, my past will follow me. No one wants to hire a woman who has been a dance hall girl." Harrison was quiet again, but it was a comfortable silence, as if he was truly considering her words rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. Finally, he said, "What if your past did not matter? What if someone was willing to see who you are now, not who you were forced to be?" Clara let out a shaky laugh. "That would be a miracle. Those do not happen for women like me." "Maybe they do," Harrison said softly. "Maybe you just have not met the right person yet." Before Clara could respond, the back door slammed open and Madame Rousseau appeared, her face twisted with anger. "Clara, what are you doing out here? Get back inside, you have customers waiting." Clara pushed off from the wall, the brief moment of peace shattering like glass. "I am coming," she said wearily. She glanced at Harrison one last time, trying to memorize his face, certain she would never see him again after tonight. Men like him did not stay in places like Red Bluff, and women like her did not get happy endings. The next 3 days passed in the usual blur of exhaustion and monotony. The cattle drive men remained in town, waiting for a shipment of supplies that had been delayed, and each night they filled the Silver Spur with their noise and their money. Clara did not see Harrison Fletcher again, and she told herself it was better that way. Their conversation had been a brief respite, nothing more, and she needed to focus on saving enough money to escape this life, not daydreaming about a cowboy with kind eyes who probably had not thought about her once since that night. On the 4th night, Clara was clearing glasses from tables during a rare lull when Madame Rousseau approached her with a strange expression on her face. "There is a man asking for you specifically. He is waiting outside, says it is important." Clara's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety. Men who asked for specific girls usually wanted something beyond dancing. And while Madame Rousseau liked to maintain the fiction that her establishment was simply a dance hall and saloon, everyone knew girls could be persuaded to provide additional services for the right price. Clara had managed to avoid that aspect of the business so far, but she knew her refusals were wearing thin on Madame Rousseau's patience. "Tell him I am not available," Clara said firmly. "He specifically said to tell you it is Harrison Fletcher, and he just wants to talk," Madame Rousseau replied, her eyes calculating. "He offered me $20 just for 10 minutes of your time outside. I would not turn that down if I were you." Clara's heart began to pound as she set down the tray of glasses. $20 was more than she made in 2 weeks of dancing. She walked through the saloon and out the front door, finding Harrison standing in the street, holding the reins of a beautiful chestnut mare. The horse was saddled and packed as if ready for a journey. "What is this?" Clara asked, confusion mixing with a hope she was afraid to name. Harrison looked nervous, a sharp contrast to his usual calm demeanor. "I have been thinking about what you said the other night. About having nowhere to go, about your past following you everywhere. I have a proposition, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on her bare shoulders. "I am listening." "Come with me," Harrison said simply. "The drive heads out tomorrow morning. Come with us. I need a camp cook anyway, and you could earn honest wages. Once we get to Oregon, I can help you get settled somewhere new, somewhere no one knows you, where you can start fresh." Clara stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to just leave? With a cattle drive? With you?" "I know it sounds crazy," Harrison admitted, taking a step closer, "but I have not been able to stop thinking about you, about that look in your eyes when you talked about being trapped. I know what it is like to feel stuck, to feel like life is just something that happens to you rather than something you choose. My mother never got a chance to escape. She died in that dance hall in Abilene, and I have always wondered what her life could have been if someone had offered her a way out. You do not even know me, Clara protested, but her heart was racing with the possibility of what he was offering. Freedom, escape, a chance at a different life. I know enough, Harrison replied. I know you are smart and tough and you have survived 6 years in a place that breaks most people. I know you deserve a chance at something better. This is that chance, Clara. Take it. Clara's mind was spinning. This was insane. She could not just leave with a cattle drive, could not just trust a man she had spoken to once. But even as those rational thoughts fought for dominance, another part of her, the part that had been slowly dying in the Silver Spur, was screaming at her to say yes. What did she have to lose? More years of dancing until her body gave out or she ended up like Harrison's mother, worked to death with nothing to show for it. I have money saved, Clara said slowly. Not much, but some. I would not be dependent on you. I would not expect you to be, Harrison assured her. This is not about me owning you or controlling you. This is about giving you a chance to get somewhere where you can be whoever you want to be. The cattle drive pays me well, and I have no family to support. I can afford to help you get started somewhere new. Why would you do this for a stranger? Clara asked, needing to understand his motivation. Harrison met her eyes steadily. Because I can. Because it is the right thing to do. And because when I look at you, I do not see a dance hall girl. I see a woman who has been fighting to survive and deserves a chance to actually live. Clara felt something crack open in her chest, some protective wall she had built around her heart. She said she had been a dance hall girl for far too long, she whispered, testing the words. Harrison's expression softened. That was then. This is now. The simple response, the absolute conviction in his voice made Clara's decision for her. She nodded once sharply before she could second-guess herself. I need to get my things, and I need to get my money from my mattress. I will wait here, Harrison promised. Take your time. Clara turned and ran back into the Silver Spur, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She took the back stairs 2 at a time, burst into her room, and began frantically pulling her few possessions together. She had one spare dress, some undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and the small pouch of coins hidden in her mattress. She changed out of her dance hall costume into her plain brown traveling dress, tied her hair back with a simple ribbon, and took one last look around the tiny room that had been her prison for 6 years. She did not owe Madame Rousseau anything. The woman had taken more than enough from her over the years. Clara crept back down the stairs, hoping to avoid notice, but Madame Rousseau was standing at the bottom with her arms crossed. And where do you think you are going? The older woman demanded. I am leaving, Clara said firmly, pushing past her. Madame Rousseau grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. You owe me rent. You owe me for that dress you are wearing. I owe you nothing, Clara shot back, jerking her arm free. You have taken enough from me, I am done. She did not wait for a response, just pushed through the crowded saloon toward the front door. Behind her, she heard Madame Rousseau shouting, but Clara did not look back. She burst out into the night air where Harrison was still waiting, exactly as he had promised. Let us go, Clara said breathlessly, before she sends someone after me. Harrison helped her mount the mare, then swung up behind her. They rode through the dark streets of Red Bluff at a quick trot, not slowing until they reached the camp outside town where the cattle drive was preparing for the next day's departure. Several cowboys looked up curiously as Harrison helped Clara down from the horse, but he silenced them with a look. "This is Miss Clara Morgan," Harrison announced to the assembled men. "She will be traveling with us as our new camp cook. Anyone who has a problem with that can draw their pay now and head back to Texas." The men exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. Clara stood tall despite her shaking legs, meeting their curious stares with as much dignity as she could muster. These were rough men, she knew, cowboys who had probably spent plenty of time in dance halls themselves. But they worked for Harrison, and it was clear from their reactions that they respected him enough not to question his decisions. "You can sleep in the chuck wagon tonight," Harrison told Clara quietly. "It will be cramped but private. Tomorrow we ride out at dawn." Clara nodded, unable to form words. The enormity of what she had just done was beginning to sink in. She had left her job, her room, the only life she had known for 6 years, to ride off with a man she barely knew on a cattle drive heading north through dangerous territory. It was absolutely insane. It was also the most liberated she had felt since before her father died. Harrison showed her to the chuck wagon, a sturdy vehicle packed with supplies and cooking equipment. He helped her climb into the back where there was just enough room to lie down among the sacks of flour and beans. "Thank you," Clara said, finally finding her voice. "I do not understand why you are doing this, but thank you." Harrison's face was shadowed in the darkness, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." The next morning, Clara woke before dawn to the sounds of men moving around camp, horses being saddled, cattle lowing in the distance. She climbed out of the chuck wagon feeling stiff and disoriented, but more alive than she had in years. The sky was just beginning to lighten, streaks of pink and gold spreading across the horizon. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee and possibility. Harrison appeared beside her, holding 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word, and they stood together watching the sun rise. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup and let herself believe, just for a moment, that this might actually work. That she might actually escape her past and build something new. "Ready?" Harrison asked after they had finished their coffee. "As ready as I will ever be," Clara replied honestly. The cattle drive set out with the rising sun. A slow-moving river of cattle, horses, and men heading north along the Sacramento Valley. Clara rode in the chuck wagon with the driver, an older man named Pete, who was mostly deaf and perfectly content, to let her sit in silence while she tried to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. They traveled steadily throughout the day, stopping only briefly for a midday meal of jerky and hardtack. That evening, they made camp near a creek, and Clara experienced her first attempt at cooking for 30 hungry cowboys. She had done plenty of cooking before her dance hall years, helping her father in their small house, but nothing on this scale. She burned the beans, undercooked the biscuits, and made coffee so strong several men joked it could strip paint. But the cowboys ate everything without complaint, and Harrison caught her eye across the campfire with an encouraging smile that warmed her more than the flames. As days turned into weeks, Clara found herself settling into the rhythm of the trail. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, served the men, cleaned up, rode in the chuck wagon all day, then repeated the process for dinner. It was exhausting work, harder in many ways than dancing had been, but it was honest work. No one grabbed at her or made crude suggestions. The cowboys treated her with wary respect, clearly unsure what to make of a former dance hall girl traveling with their trail boss, but unwilling to challenge Harrison's authority by treating her poorly. Harrison checked on her every evening, sitting by the fire while she cleaned up after dinner. Their conversation started as brief exchanges about the day's travel, the condition of the herd, the weather forecast. But gradually they deepened, becoming the highlight of Clara's day. Harrison told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride and rope before he could read, about his mother's death, and how he had worked on ranches from the age of 13, slowly working his way up from cattle hand to trail boss, about his dreams of someday owning his own ranch, somewhere green and peaceful, far from the dust and chaos of the cattle trails. Clara found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her childhood in Sacramento before her mother died of fever, about her father's descent into drink and debt after losing his wife, about the shame she had felt walking into the Silver Spur for the first time, knowing she was giving up any chance at a respectable future, about the 1,000 tiny humiliations and dangers of dance hall life, the constant fear of disease or violence, the soul-crushing repetition of selling her smile night after night. "You survived it," Harrison said one night, about 3 weeks into the journey. They were camped in the foothills of the mountains, and the night air had turned cold enough to see their breath. "That takes more strength than most people have. You should be proud of that." Clara stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I do not feel strong. I feel like I ran away." "Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is leave," Harrison replied. "Staying somewhere that is killing you, that is not strength. That is just stubbornness." Clara looked at him then, really looked at him in the flickering firelight. Over the past weeks, she had learned to read the expressions that crossed his face, the subtle changes that indicated his mood. Right now, he looked at her with something that made her heart skip, an intensity that went beyond simple kindness or pity. It was something warmer, something that made her both excited and terrified. "Why did you really ask me to come with you?" Clara asked quietly. "The truth, Harrison." He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "Because the moment I saw you in that saloon, I knew you were different. Special. And then when we talked outside, when you looked at me like I was an actual person instead of just another customer, I knew I could not just walk away. I kept thinking about you being trapped there, and it made me furious. Not at you, but at a world that leaves women with so few choices. So I made you another choice." "That is all it was," Clara pressed, needing to know. Just wanting to help. Harrison's expression became almost vulnerable. "At first, yes. But Clara, I would be lying if I said that was all it is now. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you work so hard and never complain, talking with you every night, I have developed feelings for you. Strong feelings. But I did not want to say anything because I know you just escaped a situation where men felt entitled to you. I do not want to be another man making demands or expectations. When we get to Oregon, if you want to go your own way, I will help you do that. No strings attached." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she was certain Harrison could hear it. She had known on some level that what was developing between them was more than friendship. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing the careful respect in his voice as he offered to let her go, made her realize something crucial. She did not want to go her own way. Not anymore. Not without him. "What if I do not want to go my own way?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison went very still. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have feelings for you too," Clara admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been trying to tell myself it is just gratitude, just relief at being free from the Silver Spur. But it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel like myself again, like the person I was before everything went wrong. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to believe in things like hope and second chances. I do not know what that means for us, but I needed you to know." The smile that spread across Harrison's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "It means we figure this out together. No rush, no pressure. We just keep getting to know each other and see where this goes, if that is what you want." "That is what I want," Clara confirmed, squeezing his hand. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. Something had shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was the beginning of something real and precious. Clara had never believed in fresh starts before, but sitting there in the mountains with Harrison's hand in hers, she began to think that maybe, just maybe, she deserved one after all. The drive continued north, pushing through increasingly difficult terrain as they entered the Cascade Range. The work became harder, the days longer, and everyone's patience grew thin. Clara's cooking improved through sheer necessity and practice, and she even earned a few genuine compliments from the cowboys. She and Harrison stole moments together whenever possible, brief conversations while she served breakfast, longer talks after dinner when the camp settled for the night. They were careful not to be too obvious, not wanting to give the men reason to gossip or question Harrison's judgment in bringing her along. One evening, about 5 weeks into the journey, a late spring storm rolled in with terrifying speed. Lightning split the sky, thunder crashed like cannon fire, and rain poured down in sheets that turned the trail into a river of mud. The cattle spooked and scattered, and every man in the drive had to mount up and ride into the storm to keep the herd from stampeding completely. Clara huddled in the chuck wagon, listening to the chaos outside and praying that everyone would make it back safely. It was nearly midnight before the storm passed, and the men began straggling back into camp, soaked and exhausted. Clara immediately set about making hot coffee and heating up leftover stew, needing to do something useful. She counted the returning cowboys anxiously, her heart not settling until she saw Harrison ride in on his big bay gelding, muddy and tired but unharmed. Their eyes met across the camp, and the relief Clara felt was so intense it nearly knocked her over. She realized in that moment that this was not just a crush or infatuation. She had fallen in love with Harrison Fletcher. Deeply, terrifyingly in love with a man who had given her freedom and asked for nothing in return. The knowledge both thrilled and scared her. Love made you vulnerable. Love could hurt you in ways that nothing else could. But looking at Harrison as he dismounted and walked toward her, Clara decided that some risks were worth taking. "You are alive," Clara said when he reached her, hating how shaky her voice sounded. "I am," Harrison confirmed, accepting the cup of coffee she pressed into his hands. "Were you worried?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "I kept thinking about what would happen if something happened to you, if you did not come back, and I realized that I cannot imagine continuing this journey without you. Not just because you helped me escape Red Bluff, but because you have become the most important person in my life." Harrison set down his coffee cup and took both of her hands in his. Water dripped from his hair and his clothes were covered in mud, but Clara had never seen anything more beautiful than the expression on his face in that moment. "Clara Morgan, I am in love with you. I have been for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid you would think I had some ulterior motive, that I helped you just to get something from you. But that storm tonight, riding through it and thinking I might not make it back, all I could think about was you. About how I never told you how I really feel." "I love you too," Clara said, the words feeling both strange and absolutely right. "I never thought I would be able to say that to anyone, not after everything, but you changed that. You changed everything." Harrison pulled her close, and Clara went into his arms without hesitation. He smelled like rain and mud and horse, and she did not care at all. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the middle of a muddy camp surrounded by tired cowboys, and Clara felt something she had not experienced in years. She felt safe. She felt valued. She felt loved. The next morning, Harrison gathered the men and made an announcement. Miss Morgan has agreed to stay on with the drive permanently. She has also agreed to marry me once we reach Oregon and can find a proper minister. I expect every man here to treat her with the respect due to my future wife. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now. Clara stood beside him, her chin held high, watching the cowboys' reactions. There were a few surprised faces, but mostly she saw acceptance and even some genuine smiles. These men had watched her work hard every day for over a month. They had seen Harrison's devotion to her and her growing confidence. Whatever they might have thought about her past, it seemed they were willing to judge her on who she was now, not who she had been. One of the older cowboys, a leathery man named Jackson who had been on drives for 20 years, stepped forward and tipped his hat to Clara. "Congratulations, Miss Morgan. Fletcher is a lucky man, and for what it is worth, you make a damn sight better coffee than the last cook we had." The tension broke with laughter, and Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the simple acceptance. She had spent so long being judged and dismissed, so long feeling like her past defined her entire existence. But these rough cowboys were willing to see her as Harrison's fiancée, as their cook, as a person rather than just a former dance hall girl. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The drive continued, pushing through the mountains and into Oregon territory. Clara and Harrison spent every possible moment together, their love deepening with each passing day. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Harrison told her more about his plan to buy land and start his own ranch, raising horses instead of cattle. Clara shared her secret dream of learning to read better, of maybe even opening a small restaurant someday where she could cook for people who appreciated good food. "We could do both," Harrison suggested one evening as they sat by the fire. "Buy land that is good for horses, build a house with a big kitchen where you can experiment with recipes. Maybe eventually open a place nearby where travelers can get a good meal. Oregon is growing fast. Plenty of people would appreciate a decent restaurant." "You would really want that?" Clara asked, hardly daring to believe it. "You would support me having my own business?" "Why would I not?" Harrison replied, looking genuinely confused. "You are one of the hardest workers I have ever met. If you want to run a restaurant, I will help you make it happen. Your dreams matter just as much as mine, Clara." She kissed him then, right there in front of the camp, not caring who saw. Harrison kissed her back with a gentleness that still took her breath away, his hand cupping her face like she was something precious and fragile. When they finally pulled apart, several cowboys were grinning and one even applauded sarcastically, but Clara just laughed. She was happy. After so many years of misery and hopelessness, she was genuinely, completely happy. They reached the town of Portland, Oregon in late June, having been on the trail for nearly 2 months. The cattle were sold to a buyer who had been waiting, and Harrison divided up the profits with the men who had made the drive. Clara watched him settle accounts with fairness and generosity, paying bonuses to the cowboys who had worked hardest, making sure everyone had enough money to get home or start fresh wherever they were going. It was clear why the men respected him so much. He treated them like partners rather than just hired hands. With the drive completed and his obligations fulfilled, Harrison turned his attention to Clara and their future. They found a small church in Portland where a minister agreed to marry them. Clara had no family to invite and no friends, just the memory of the life she had left behind in Red Bluff. But Harrison's best men from the drive attended, including old Jackson, who stood up as Harrison's witness. Clara wore a simple blue dress that Harrison bought for her from a shop in town, and she carried wildflowers that Harrison picked that morning. The ceremony was brief and simple, but the words meant everything. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clara felt like she was being reborn, shedding the skin of Clara Morgan, the dance hall girl, and stepping into a new life as Clara Fletcher, beloved wife and partner. Harrison kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks, tears of joy rather than sorrow for the first time in years. They spent their wedding night in a real hotel, with a real bed and clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside. Harrison was patient and gentle, aware that Clara's experiences with physical intimacy had not been pleasant ones. He took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together as husband and wife, Clara understood for the first time what it meant to give yourself to someone who truly loved you. It was nothing like the dance hall, nothing like the grabbing hands and crude expectations. This was love, pure and simple, two people choosing each other and building something beautiful together. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity and change. Harrison purchased land about 30 miles outside Portland, a beautiful property with rolling hills, good grazing, and a creek running through it. They lived in a tent while Harrison and some hired men built a house, a solid structure with 3 bedrooms, a big kitchen just as Harrison had promised, and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Clara threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains, planting a garden, learning to manage a household that was truly hers. They bought their first horses that fall, sturdy breeding stock that would form the foundation of their ranch. Harrison proved to be as skilled with horses as he had been with cattle, and within a year, they had a small but growing operation. Word spread about the quality of Fletcher horses, and buyers began making the trip out to their ranch specifically to see what they had for sale. Clara started cooking for the ranch hands Harrison hired, and inevitably, word spread about her food as well. Buyers would time their visits to coincide with mealtimes, and more than once someone suggested she should open a restaurant. Clara was tempted but also nervous. She had built a good life here on the ranch, far from anyone who knew her past. Opening a restaurant would mean interacting with the public, and she worried constantly that someone would recognize her, that word would get out about her years in the Silver Spur. Harrison noticed her hesitation and brought it up one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the first stars appear. "You are worried about people finding out about Red Bluff," he said gently. It was not a question. "Every day," Clara admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to walk into our ranch and recognize me, to tell everyone what I used to be, to ruin everything we have built here." Harrison took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "What you used to be was a woman surviving impossible circumstances. Anyone who judges you for that is not worth knowing. But Clara, you cannot live your whole life afraid of your past. You have nothing to be ashamed of." "The world does not see it that way," Clara replied quietly. "Women like me, former dance hall girls, we do not get second chances. We do not get to be respectable wives and businesswomen. If people knew, they would treat me differently. They would treat you differently." "Then let them," Harrison said firmly. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I know who you are. You know who you are. That is all that matters. And honestly, Clara, I think you are underestimating people. You are not that naive girl who walked into the Silver Spur anymore. You are a strong, capable woman who has built a successful life through hard work and determination. Anyone with sense will see that." Clara wanted to believe him, but the fear was deeply rooted. She had spent 6 years being treated as less than human, as property to be rented by the hour. The shame of those years sat heavy in her chest, and no amount of Harrison's love and support seemed able to completely wash it away. It was nearly 2 years after they married that Clara's worst fear came true. A man rode up to the ranch one afternoon, a prospector who had struck it rich in the California gold fields and was looking to buy horses for his new mining operation. Clara was serving lunch to the ranch hands when the man walked into the kitchen, and she knew immediately from the recognition in his eyes that he had been in the Silver Spur. She could not remember his name or face specifically, but she remembered the type. Loud, arrogant, the kind who thought his money entitled him to anything he wanted. "Well, well," the prospector said slowly, a nasty smile spreading across his face. "Little Clara from the Silver Spur, never thought I would see you playing housewife. Does your husband know what you used to do?" "What you used to be?" Clara's hands shook as she set down the pitcher of water she had been holding. The ranch hands had gone quiet, all eyes on her. She felt exposed, naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothes. This was the moment she had dreaded for 2 years, and it was every bit as awful as she had imagined. "Get out of my house," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. "Or what?" the prospector challenged. "You will have me thrown out. I am a paying customer." "I am sure your husband would rather keep my business than defend a washed-up dance hall girl." "You would be wrong about that." Harrison's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He stepped into the kitchen, his expression thunderous. "Clara is my wife. She is the co-owner of this ranch. And you will address her with respect or you will leave immediately." The prospector looked between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "You know what she is, what she did." "I know that my wife survived circumstances that would have broken most people," Harrison replied coldly. "I know that she is the hardest worker I have ever met and the best person I know. I know that I love her more than anything in this world. What she did to survive before we met is none of your concern and does not change any of those facts. Now you have 5 seconds to apologize to my wife and leave, or I will personally throw you off this property." The prospector stared at Harrison for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he turned and walked out without another word. The sound of his horse riding away was the only noise in the heavy silence that followed. Clara stood frozen, waiting for the ranch hands to react, to quit, to treat her differently. But Jackson, who had stayed on after the drive to help build the ranch, stood up and looked at the other men. "Well, now we know the boss's wife is even tougher than we thought. Takes real strength to survive that kind of life and come out the other side. Any man who has a problem with that can leave with that idiot prospector. The rest of us have work to do." One by one, the ranch hands nodded and filed out back to their duties. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief, and Harrison was immediately at her side, supporting her. "See," he murmured into her hair as he held her. "I told you, your past does not define you. We define ourselves by who we choose to be now." Clara clung to him, finally allowing herself to believe it. She had been so afraid of this moment, certain it would destroy everything. But it had not. Harrison had defended her without hesitation. The ranch hands had accepted the truth without judgment. The world had not ended. Maybe, just maybe, she really could move forward without the weight of her past dragging her down. That night, Clara and Harrison talked for hours about what had happened and what it meant. Clara admitted that she had been letting fear control her, holding her back from pursuing her dreams because she was afraid of being exposed. Harrison reminded her that she had already survived the worst. She had faced her past and come through it. Nothing else could hurt her as long as they faced it together. Emboldened by the day's events and Harrison's unwavering support, Clara decided to move forward with her restaurant idea. They found a location in Portland, a small building near the docks where travelers and sailors were always looking for good food. Clara named it the Fletcher House, a simple name that connected it to their ranch without calling attention to herself. She spent months developing her menu, testing recipes on Harrison and the ranch hands until she had a selection she was proud of. The restaurant opened in the spring of 1881, 3 years after Clara had fled Red Bluff. She was terrified on opening day, certain that no one would come or that disaster would strike. But customers trickled in steadily, drawn by word of mouth and the delicious smells coming from her kitchen. Clara cooked while Harrison helped manage the front of the house, making customers feel welcome and taking orders. They worked together seamlessly, partners in every sense of the word. The Fletcher house became known for its excellent food and warm atmosphere. Clara still worried sometimes that someone would recognize her, but as weeks turned to months with no incidents, she began to relax. And even if someone did recognize her, she realized she had Harrison beside her. She had their ranch and their business. She had built a life worth protecting, and she would not let fear steal her joy anymore. By the summer of 1882, Clara realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never thought she would have the chance at such a normal, beautiful life. Harrison was over the moon, already planning additions to their house and talking about teaching their child to ride. Clara found herself imagining a future filled with laughter and family dinners, and all the things she had thought were forever beyond her reach. Their son was born in February of 1883, a healthy baby boy with Harrison's dark hair and Clara's green eyes. They named him Thomas, after Clara's father, a gesture that helped Clara make peace with her past. Holding her son for the first time, Clara felt the last pieces of shame and regret fall away. She had survived. She had escaped. She had built a beautiful life with a man who loved her unconditionally. Her past did not define her. It was simply part of her story, the difficult chapters that made the happy ending all the sweeter. The years that followed were full and rich. They hired a manager for the restaurant, so Clara could spend more time with Thomas while still maintaining control over the menu and recipes. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming known throughout Oregon for its quality horses. Clara and Harrison added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Sarah in 1885, and another son named Henry in 1887. Clara taught her children to read and write, determined they would have the education she had been denied. She told them, in age-appropriate ways, about her past, wanting them to understand that people could overcome difficult circumstances and build beautiful lives. She taught them never to judge someone by where they came from, but by who they chose to be. Harrison supported her completely, treating her past as simply one part of their family history rather than something shameful to be hidden. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Clara by taking her back to Red Bluff. She was terrified at first, not understanding why he would want to return to the place where her nightmare had begun. But Harrison insisted, and Clara trusted him enough to agree. They rode into town together, and Clara was shocked by how small and shabby it looked. The silver spur was still there, but it appeared run down and sad, a shadow of what she remembered. They did not go inside. Instead, Harrison led her to a small hill overlooking the town where they could see the whole valley spread out below them. "I wanted you to see it again," Harrison explained, holding her hand. "Not the way it was in your memory, all-powerful and inescapable, but the way it really is. Just a small town with a run-down saloon. It has no power over you anymore, Clara. You escaped. You built something amazing. I wanted you to see that with your own eyes." Clara looked down at Red Bluff, at the silver spur, and realized Harrison was right. It was just a building, just a place. She had given it so much power in her mind, had let it haunt her for years. but she had left it behind long ago. She was Clara Fletcher now, successful businesswoman, rancher's wife, mother to 3 beautiful children. That dance hall girl she had been was just a memory, a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. "Thank you," Clara said softly, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. "For everything. For giving me a chance when no one else would. For loving me when I could not love myself. For showing me that I could be more than my past." Harrison kissed the top of her head. "You were always more than your past. I just helped you see it." They rode away from Red Bluff together, leaving it in the distance where it belonged, and headed home to Oregon and the life they had built together. Clara never looked back again. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and family and love. Clara expanded the Fletcher house into a second location, this one closer to their ranch. Both restaurants thrived, becoming fixtures in their communities. The horse ranch grew as well, with Thomas showing early signs of having his father's gift for working with animals. Sarah inherited Clara's love of cooking and spent hours in the kitchen with her mother, learning recipes and techniques. Henry was the quiet one, more interested in books and learning than horses or cooking, and Clara encouraged his intellectual pursuits with the same enthusiasm Harrison showed for the ranch work. Clara and Harrison grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges, as all couples do. Bad weather that hurt the horse business, a fire that damaged one of the restaurants, the normal struggles of raising 3 strong-willed children. But they faced everything together, partners in every sense of the word. On their 20th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their adult children and growing brood of grandchildren, Clara looked around at the life she had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought back to that terrified young woman in the Silver Spur, certain she would die in that dance hall with nothing to show for her life. She thought about Harrison's simple words that had changed everything. That was then, this is now. Those 5 words had given her permission to leave her past behind and embrace a future she had never dared to imagine. They had been her permission to be happy, to be loved, to build something beautiful. And she had built it, with Harrison by her side every step of the way. Clara stood up at the anniversary dinner, raising her glass. "I want to make a toast," she announced, waiting for the room to quiet. 20 years ago, I was a woman with no hope and no future. Then I met a stubborn cowboy who refused to leave me behind. Harrison Fletcher, you gave me everything. A home, a family, a life worth living. You taught me that our pasts do not have to define us, that we can choose who we want to be. You loved me when I was unlovable and believed in me when I did not believe in myself. Here is to 20 more years, my love. I will spend every one of them showing you how grateful I am." Harrison stood and pulled her close, kissing her soundly despite the children's protests and laughter. When he released her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You were never unlovable, Clara Fletcher. You were just waiting for someone to see you clearly. I am the lucky one. Here is to 20 more years of proving it to you." Their children and grandchildren cheered and toasted, and Clara looked around at all the faces she loved. All the people who existed because a cowboy had looked at a dance hall girl and seen not her past, but her future. She thought about how close she had come to missing all of this, to spending her whole life in that saloon until she was used up and forgotten. But she had not. She had taken a chance. She had trusted a stranger. She had chosen hope over despair, and that choice had given her everything. As Clara sat down, Harrison's hand finding hers under the table like always, she sent a silent thank you to her younger self for being brave enough to leave, and to Harrison for being brave enough to ask. The party continued late into the night, filled with laughter and storytelling and love. Clara's past was never mentioned, not because it was a secret, but because it simply was not relevant anymore. She was not that dance hall girl. She was Clara Fletcher, and she had built an extraordinary life. Years later, when Clara was in her 60s and her hair had turned silver, she sat on the porch of their ranch with Harrison, watching the sunset paint the Oregon sky in shades of pink and gold. Their children had families of their own now, and their grandchildren were growing up strong and confident. The restaurants were being run by Sarah and her husband, and Thomas had taken over much of the day-to-day ranch operations. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind of peace that only comes after decades of work and love and partnership. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked Harrison suddenly. "Taking a chance on me that night in Red Bluff. Your life would have been much simpler without me." Harrison turned to look at her, his face weathered and lined but his eyes still warm with love. "Not for a single second. Clara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You made my life infinitely richer and more meaningful. I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to build something lasting." "I think we gave that to each other," Clara replied, squeezing his hand. "You saved me, Harrison. In every way a person can be saved. I would not have survived much longer in that saloon. I was dying inside, little by little." "You gave me life. You saved yourself," Harrison corrected gently. "I just opened the door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it." Clara smiled, knowing they could argue this point forever and never agree. The truth was they had saved each other. Two people who found exactly what they needed at exactly the right moment. It was not magic or fate or divine intervention. It was simply two people choosing each other, again and again, through all the challenges life threw at them. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Clara leaned against Harrison's shoulder, feeling utterly content. She had lived a long, full life, far beyond anything she had imagined possible during those dark years in the dance hall. She had loved and been loved. She had raised children who knew their worth. She had built businesses that served her community. She had created beauty and meaning from the ashes of her former life. The dance hall girl was gone, left behind in Red Bluff decades ago. In her place was a woman who had learned that it was never too late to start over, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that your past did not have to determine your future. All it took was one person willing to see you clearly and say those magic words. That was then. This is now. Clara Fletcher closed her eyes, listening to the crickets sing and feeling Harrison's steady presence beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she had lived a life worth living. She had overcome her past, built something beautiful, and loved deeply. What more could anyone ask for? As sleep began to claim her in the peaceful twilight, Clara smiled, grateful beyond measure for the cowboy who had given her a second chance and the courage to take it.